All right. Good evening and welcome everyone to an MHCH Housing Justice Educational Forum, Affordable Housing on Church and Religious Land After the Wildfires. This evening we have two presenters. We were going to have three, but Dorothy Evans, founder of Hope Now Community Resource Center, she was going to talk about her work in the community, but she could not come because she is working in the community tonight, helping out one of her seniors who lost their home. We do have the other two presenters. Our first presenter will be Scott Chamberlain, Executive Director of the San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness. And he will help us look at the regional housing need, the regional need for housing, and the moral imperative to use any unused faith property for housing our vulnerable and marginalized populations as a reflection of the compassionate heart of God for all humanity. And then Phil Burns, the leader of the Arroyo Group and the chair of our Congregational Land Committee, which is a joint project of LA Voice and Making Housing and Community Happen, will tell us how his community is working with religious congregations across Southern California and also across the country to build affordable housing. If you have any questions during the presentations, please put them in the chat and then we can get to them after the presentations. But before all that, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about what is going on at Making Housing and Community Happen. So I'm going to share my screen here. I have a PowerPoint. So let me share. And can you see that? Hopefully you can.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. So what's happening at MHCH, otherwise known as our team reports. So at Making Housing and Community Happen, we have a small staff, but we have a lot of volunteers and a lot of them work on our teams. I'm going to talk about 4 different teams and our Housing Justice Institutes. So first we have our safe parking team. So there are about 15,000 people who live in their vehicles in Los Angeles County, but until a few years ago, there was no safe parking program in the whole San Gabriel Valley. So we started one at Trinity Lutheran Church here in Pasadena. And Friends Indeed is the provider, the service provider now. It was Foothill Unity Center, but now it's Friends Indeed. So at this church, they have 10 safe places to park in their parking lot. The parkers get access to a bathroom and also to a break room in the church building. Also, they get case management services from Friends Indeed, and that includes linkages to mental health treatment, linkages to other resources, and permanent housing. So there have been 20 participants in the program so far, and 12 of them have been permanently housed. And now a new site is coming to Pasadena, a new safe parking site at All Saints Church. So ours was the pioneer. In fact, when we started our program, it wasn't even legal. We had to do it under the radar. But we did some organizing and advocacy, got it legalized. And now the city not only considers it legal, they're actually helping All Saints Church start their new safe parking program. And that's going to have 25 parking spaces. And they're helping with the funding. It's going to have a different service provider. But yeah, so we pioneered it, but and by the way, Trinity Lutheran Church, Pastor Richter and their congregation have done a great job of launching this program and organizing it with the service providers. They're not just hosting it, they are actually actively involved. So that's our safe parking team. Then our Affordable Supportive Housing Advocates team, our ASHA, has won a lot of victories. I'm just going to talk about a few of the major victories we've won over the years. One of them is pictured right here. It's Heritage Square South. That's 69 units of permanent supportive housing for unhoused seniors. It's at the corner of Orange Grove and Fair Oaks, if you know Pasadena. This was a big campaign of ours in 2018. The site was mostly empty except for a small Church's Chicken restaurant. And there were unhoused senior women that slept there. We started with a interfaith prayer vigil at the site, and then some of us slept over at the site with the unhoused women that were sleeping there. And then we packed out city council meetings. We got it approved. That was back in 2018. It took a number of years to get the financing together to get it built, but it finally opened up this past spring, almost a year ago now. Spring, early summer, it opened up. 69 units, permanent supportive housing for unhoused seniors. It's a beautiful building. I've seen it on the inside. It's just wonderful. Then right after that, we did a campaign to get affordable housing in our civic center, and we won that. 100 units of affordable senior housing, half of it permanent supportive housing for unhoused seniors, right in our civic center across from City Hall. There's an empty lot there. Um, and then last year, we got approval of affordable staff housing at one of our closed school sites. So there's a number of school sites that have closed in Pasadena. I think it's 11 schools have closed in the last 18 years. So we did a campaign to get affordable housing at one of them. This is actually work that Jill started years ago, but then the school board member that she was working with the closest, Michelle Bailey, she called us and said, "Hey, this is a good time to revive that campaign." So we organized, and we were successful in getting the school board to vote twice, 6-1, for affordable staff housing. But this won't be just for teachers. This will be also for other staff that make even less than teachers do. Janitors, teachers' assistants, office staff. A lot of them can't afford to live in Pasadena, and they're commuting from far away, from Riverside, San Bernardino. And we found out that 2 janitors were living in their vehicles. So this will be 110 units, mixed income, which is the best way to go, because the history of housing in the United States is one of segregation, which has made us a weak and divided society. So the best practice is to do integrated housing, and this is what this will be. But some of the units will be as low as 600 per month. 55 of them will rent for 1,500 or less. And there'll be 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom apartments, 110 units. And it'll be paid for with a bond that passed, so it won't be reliant on federal or state dollars. It's from a bond that we passed here in Pasadena. So those are 3 of the things that our ASHA group has done. There's other victories. I was thinking of one today where right after the pandemic, when the city council was going to have only in-person meetings, they weren't going to do Zoom anymore, but we did a campaign to get them to do hybrid meetings. Now, there were other people that advocated for this too, but we did a campaign around it. And because of that, the city council now does hybrid meetings, not just at their city council meetings, but every city council committee and some of the commissions as well have hybrid meetings where people can participate by Zoom as well as in person. Also, we just finished a campaign with the Pasadena Tenants Union and National Day Laborers Organizing Network to get eviction protections for people whose income was affected by the fires. So we just got that. In fact, the second reading of the ordinance was last night at City Council. We were successful in that. And of course, we had worked with the Pasadena Tenants Union a few years ago to get Measure H rent control and tenant protections passed here in Pasadena. So the ASHA team has done a lot of stuff over the years. Those are just some of our victories. But next, I want to talk about the Fair Oaks Empowerment Team. This team is working in a specific area of Pasadena, specific neighborhood, North Fair Oaks, north of Washington, between Washington and Woodbury. This is the most neglected part of the city. So their motto is to beautify and not gentrify. And they want to do this with better signage, more trees, sidewalk repairs, and affordable housing, increasing density and getting affordable housing, and complete streets, slowing down traffic and making it more walkable. It's a very dangerous part of the city because people just zoom down Fair Oaks. So earlier this month, this team made a major step forward in getting this vision adopted. The team has been working for 10 years in the community to get this vision plan together. But on the 12th, they went to the Planning Commission, 12th of March this month, and were able to present the vision plan to the Planning Commission. 30 people testified that night. It went on for an hour and a half, the testimonies. 40 emails that were sent in, 40 postcards to this planning commission meeting. The planning commission really seemed to like it. It was very positive. And so it looks like they're going to incorporate our vision plan, but there's more advocacy that will need to be done at another planning commission meeting in the city council. So we are faith rooted. We work through faith communities. If you want your congregation to get involved, contact me, Bert Newton. You can do that by email, bert@makinghousinghappen.org, or 626-993-7958, 626-993-7958. That's if you want to get your congregation involved. We also work through the Clergy Community Coalition, if you know about that here in Pasadena. It's a great organization. We also have a congregational land committee that consults with congregations to build affordable housing, but one of our presenters tonight, he's the chair of that team, so he's going to talk about that. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. But I do want to say something about our one-day housing justice institutes. This is something that Jill does, and sometimes some of us help her with it, but it is city specific. She goes into a community and works with a group of people in that community, in that city, for months. It's months of preparation. She does research. They research the history of the community, what might work in that community, and then it culminates in a one-day institute that brings a wider group in the community together. And then out of that is born a local housing justice group. So she's done that in a number of cities here in Southern California, as she's done it 7 times in Colorado, and then 1 time in North Carolina. And then recently she just did it in La Cañada. For those of you that are local, La Cañada, yes, that the very upscale La Cañada just did a great housing justice institute. There's some churches up there that are willing to struggle and fight for affordable housing. And so because of that Housing Justice Institute, there's now a housing justice team in La Cañada, California, going to fight for affordable housing there. So that's my report on what we're doing. So now I want to hand it over to Anthony, who's going to introduce our first speaker. And again, if you have any questions while the person is presenting, put them in the chat and we'll get to them. So Anthony, can you introduce Scott?
Sure, it would be my pleasure. Scott is amazing. Scott Chamberlain has led a life of dedicated faith-based service. He's the executive director of the San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness, which works to prevent and end homelessness in the San Gabriel Valley through education, collaboration, and advocacy. Scott also serves as associate pastor of strategic development at Montrose Church and as a senior consultant for SBC Consulting in Altadena. He was formerly the vice president of women and family programs at Union Rescue Mission, as well as senior pastor at LA City Central City Church of the Nazarene. He studied urban studies at Azusa Pacific University, and he originally came from Prairie Village, Kansas, and currently lives in Altadena with his wife, Beth, with whom he's been married for 36 years. Yay! According to his Facebook page, Scott's favorite quote is from Les Miserables, and I love this quote, so I'm going to share it with you. Will you join in our crusade? Who will be strong and stand with me? Somewhere beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? Do you hear the people sing? Say, do you hear the distant drums? It is the future that they bring when tomorrow comes. So with that, Scott, I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and we're eager to hear what you have to share with us.
Wow. Well, thanks for researching me. I'd forgotten that that's up there. Well, we could all start singing, if you know the tune. And so, thanks so much for the introduction. It's an honor to be with you. And again, I'm just going to talk about 10 minutes here. And I want to be able to have some different dialogue. As the introduction says, I'm an old man in some sense. I'm knocking on 60. And so I see a lot of friends that are on here that have done amazing work as well that I've known for decades, literally. And so as in the introduction, I'm the executive director of the San Gabriel Valley Consortium on Homelessness. But I started in Skid Row when I was 23, working with Tim Peters, planting a church-based and a non-religious nonprofit in Skid Row, especially for families living in the downtown Skid Row area. Did that, and then was working at Union Rescue Mission and oversaw not only downtown, but Hope Gardens out in that area. And so I wear 2 different hats as the consortium's executive director, as well as associate pastor of the Pasadena campus for Montrose Church on Washington near Hill Street. And so the purpose of the consortium, just so you all know, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that, again, we don't do direct service, but we really believe in collective impact, and that there is regional need, but there's also regional collaboration. and that through education and collaboration and advocacy, we can create that movement where we move forward, not just in the faith community, but using everybody's hands together to be able to pull and push together to make a better world. And so the consortium meets we are the monthly coalition lead. And so if you are not on our mailing list, we'd love to have you join us. We have a monthly meeting, different presentations and gathering stakeholders together. We have about 2,000 stakeholders, but we have the second Wednesday of every month. It's usually a virtual meeting, but twice a year we do in-person summits. And so again, if you're not part of that, please let me know. Two things I just want to talk about real quickly. And again, I'll look at Bert or somebody to be able to say 10 minutes or whatever, the 1 minute thing, I'll keep an eye on it. But I just want to talk about the need as well as solutions real quick. You may know some of the need, but I think in our own communities, I lived in Altadena for 23 years, moved to Pasadena. I need to update my bio a couple of years ago. But I like two different metaphors. When you think about the need, one is the whole metaphor in the story of, playing musical chairs, that if you've got 10 people playing musical chairs, you've only got 8 chairs, a couple of people are going to be left out. And though it might be fun in a game, it's not really good in real life. And the reason that's important is because every city in the San Gabriel Valley, 31 different jurisdictions, as well as unincorporated areas, are required to submit different things, a housing element to this state. The reality is that every city ends up developing a plan, but they're not required to ever implement. And the last 8 years, really, last 16 years, sorry, in Southern California, the stat is that 98.6% of all housing development was market rate housing. Think about that, 98.6%. which really leaves only 1.1% of the affordability was for seniors. So that left 0.3% of all housing development in Southern California was for working class affordable housing. And by nature, that means that, you can do the math, is that the 8 chairs for the 10 people just doesn't work. And so if we're not building enough housing, so just on a macro scale, that's the truth. The other illustration has to do with a tree. And if you've got a tree and you don't water it well, if you shake the tree, the leaves that are not connected fall to the ground. And I think that's really true with individuals who've experienced homelessness in different ways. The best definition, people say, well, what causes homelessness? Well, we could talk about, some people say mental illness or addiction and things like that. Is that I like the best definition is lack of connection. And I think about the leaves that aren't connected. Those are the ones that either fall to the ground. It's individuals that may not be connected. Maybe they lost their job, difficulty, but there's not enough housing available. And they've either gone through trauma or they've gone through disconnection. And so they end up being unhoused. And so the need is there. There's 5,000 people that are experiencing homelessness approximately in the San Gabriel Valley, as well as 60 to 70,000 in LA County. But it's a regional issue. It's not just cities, but there's only about 5 cities in the San Gabriel Valley who do anything from a city perspective. But it's really important that you yourself, as we talk about faith communities, we can't rely upon cities. We need to think about different solutions that faith communities can use any sort of space, any sort of land to be able to be used for common good. Just different things with solutions. And I see some different friends that are on here. There's not one answer for what the solution is. The solution is a comprehensive development that has some outreach, that has some sort of interim housing, that has some sort of affordable housing, some sort of permanent supportive for those who need more intensive services. And then there's also recuperative care. There's in-home, there's a lot of different models. Safe parking as an option. Your faith community can do a lot of different things. Hospitality centers like Faith Indeed and other places to connect individuals. But I believe that faith communities can really respond in a way that is in line with not only scripture, but also in line with your own culture, your own property. And we have great architects that can help you to think that through. Let me just close with the last thing. And my friend Tim is on here as well as others, but my favorite scripture of all is Nehemiah 2:17. And Nehemiah never heard the voice of God when he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. He just heard about the walls that have been broken down, and the gates have been burned with fire, and he responded to rebuild the walls. And in 2:17, he says, "Come, let us rebuild the walls of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be in disgrace." And the exciting thing about that is collective impact. It's coming together to be able to not just respond to build walls, but to identify, as Nehemiah says, so that we will no longer be in disgrace. And so we identify with those who are broken, we identify with those who are hurting in our neighborhoods, and we respond appropriately, not only from a faith perspective, but all just as for a human common good perspective. And so I look forward to answering any questions, and we with the consortium, we are here to be able to support, to create that communal movement of social change to help to change the San Gabriel Valley for good. So look forward to being with you for questions.
Amen. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, the faith motivation, but it's broad. It's everybody has draws faith somewhere, and yeah, I agree. And those figures you cited are really telling. I have to admit I did not know that. I should know that, but I did not know those figures. So thank you. And so we are going to hold the questions until after Phil presents. But Jill, do you want to introduce Phil?
Sure, I'd be happy to. But before I do that introduction, I'd like to mention just briefly some thoughts that Dorothy Evans was going to share, because I think it'll help bring home the need even more personally for us. She has a wonderful resource center on the corner of Lake Avenue and Woodbury called Hope Now. And she works with both youth and seniors. The synergistic between the two is powerful in meeting some mutual needs. And so I'm just going to tell a few of the stories I heard from her, but I want you just to imagine yourself as one of the seniors that she's working with. So just try to imagine. So you're African American. You've lived in Altadena for 3 up to 5 generations, could be. You no longer have a mortgage, and you are spending more than 50% of your income on housing. So you chose not to buy insurance. You've always depended on your grandkids to take care of anything having to do with computers, and yet you could not find any housing after the fires. And so you were sent all the way to Seal Beach to live, and your grandkids are far away. So you feel isolated, alone, and really at a loss of what to do. And then multiply that. So out of the 5,000 plus homes destroyed in Altadena, that means about 20,000 people have been displaced. And believe it or not, the average age of those that have been displaced is 75. So just try to put yourself in the shoes of Dorothy Evans and so many others that are seeking to help our homeless neighbors just north of Pasadena. And so keep that in mind tonight when we are trying to imagine how we can help those most in need. Now I want to switch gears and introduce Phil Burns. And it was really fun for me. I've known Phil for quite a while, but I enjoyed researching Phil and learning some new things I didn't actually know about him. I did know that he is the principal of the award-winning Arroyo Group. And so with a shared passion for preservation and innovation, the Arroyo Group developed and revitalized a plan for Pasadena heritage years ago. So that's something new I learned tonight. But that plan, which was accepted, is what transformed Old Pasadena into one of Southern California's most beloved destinations. The Aurora Group also planned Pasadena Civic Center, the Playhouse District, and they have continuously worked with cities and regional governments and organizations to build main streets and places that inspire and endure. So Phil has a really fascinating journey into becoming the principal at the Aurora Group. And so believe it or not, he studied abroad at the Pontifical, I hope I'm saying that properly, Catholic University in Chile in Santiago. And he also studied urban studies at Brown University. And then he studied preservation and design at the built environment at USC's Price School, a public policy. So to me, one of his more fascinating jobs is his job with the Peace Corps in Guatemala. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that job. So he trained community development councils and local community organizations to identify, plan, and implement development projects. So he's helped to form municipal government councils, helping the city hall communicate and be accountable to the citizens, and also to work with solid waste management, building a school out of plastic bottles. Can you believe that? I was so delighted to learn these tidbits of really interesting information about Phil. So obviously he is bilingual, multicultural planning consultant, working with multiple aspects of land use and transportation. He's a consensus builder, solution finder, data nerd who loves to understand the complexity of projects, identify core issues, design and communicate solutions to the needs within a community. So he and his wife have wonderful children, and he works with the Christian education department at his Presbyterian, at Pasadena Presbyterian Church. He's helping to coordinate that, and he's also a deacon at his church. So I'm just going to wrap this up by telling you mostly how I know him as a volunteer with Making Housing and Community Happen. First, I met him when we were working on our ADU policy years ago, making it legal finally to have accessory dwelling units in the state of California. And so that was a very successful campaign. We ended up having to go all the way to the state to finally make it successful, but that allowed anyone in the state to be able, with a single family home, to be able to have a secondary dwelling unit. There's some exceptions like hillsides where it's not safe, as we know, with fires. And so then he helped us also with our inclusionary housing ordinance and helping to increase it. So now today, 20% of all new housing that's 10 units or more in size in its development are set aside as affordable. And then later, I just had this incredible passion, not just to write about affordable housing, but to also do it. And so especially helping churches go down that path. So I couldn't stop thinking about it day and night for months. So I approached Phil, and God had also been moving in his heart. So maybe 5 years ago, we started the Congregational Land Team. Since then, we worked with over 100 congregations have approached us for our services. We've been able to help many, and it's been an amazing experience working with Phil. I so deeply respect him and love getting to work with him. And so please give him your attention as he shares our model and how we work with congregations. I do want to say one quick thing before he jumps on. This model has been so honorable helping churches. We are not developers. We are totally on the side of the church from beginning to end. And because of that, other states, other teams from other states have been interested in wanting to know about our work and learn from us. So now we have teams and emerging teams in Texas, Colorado, Washington State, and Northern California. So thank you for being with us tonight. And Phil, thank you for your work. Appreciate you very much.
Thank you, Jill, for that kind and thorough introduction there. Appreciate everyone's interest in this topic. We are going to talk about affordable housing on congregational land in the aftermath of the wildfires. But I want you to think about this too, even if you're not a representative of a congregation that has land available for development. Because some of the principles that we're going to talk about here are principles that would really apply to any piece of land. Maybe you're a homeowner whose home very sadly has burnt down. And so you now have a, blank parcel of land that you can think for the first time ever. And you need to think for the first time ever about what are you going to do with that land to be able to remain a part of the community. So, yeah, let me pull up my slides here and okay. Right. So, right. So, what does the Congregational Land Committee do? As Jill mentioned, we are not developers. We're not here to make a pitch to you as developers wanting to do something on your land. We are here to offer our services to congregations that have an interest or want to explore developing their land into affordable housing, thereby helping to really address the crisis that Scott has laid out for us. And so what we do, we're professional advisors that can basically help a congregation identify a plan for an affordable housing development on your campus that is supported by the congregation, the denomination, the city, and the community as appropriate, and then select a qualified and prepared developer that can give the congregation a fair deal for use of their property. So what we do to, the reason that we formed this is really that we were able to observe many different congregational housing projects that have occurred maybe for decades, even though we've seen it pick up a lot recently. Really, there is a much longer history to these kinds of partnerships, and the projects that are described in Making Housing Happen, Jill's 2005, I think, was the original book, are examples of those. Some of those projects were very successful. Some of them delivered amazing benefits to communities, but contributed very little to congregations, and congregations ultimately actually disappeared. And so we and others, just didn't move forward at all. And so we've learned kind of what makes a successful project, and that is those lessons are the ones that really inform the model that we've come up with to support congregations in this type of endeavor. The first one is for the congregation to lead with a vision. Let me say the typical way this is done. The typical way this is done is for a congregation to receive letters in the mail, phone calls, cold calls, etc., from developers saying, I want to buy your land, I want to buy your land, I want to buy your land. And, in some cases, they might want to do good things with it. In other cases, they might not want to do good things with it. But in all cases, almost all cases, those developers are not part of the community. And they don't know as well as you, hopefully, as a community leader, as a congregation that's doing ministry in the local community, what the real needs are. And so we believe that it's essential for the congregation to lead with a vision. That vision does need to be realistic, and that's where we come in to play. But fundamentally, it's your vision. The second key point is to achieve missional and economic benefits for the congregation. So the missional benefits of affordable housing, I think, should be clear to anybody who takes Matthew 25 seriously. The economic benefits, though, are very often also required. I mentioned cases in which congregations had done wonderful projects, but had given away their land for free. And as a result, within a few years, they ceased to operate as a ministry. Most congregations in the current environment need some kind of just compensation for the land, and that's part of what we do as advisors. Third is to partner with a developer. Now, there are congregations out there, and God bless them, that have sort of trained themselves to become real estate developers. But that is a difficult road to hoe. And I think that's really a small number of congregations that are really able to do something like that. In the vast majority of cases, you as a congregation who want to make a direct impact on affordable housing, you're going to need to do that through partnership. And so, partnership is not bad. Partnership is needed. The key is to make sure that it is a fair partnership. And then the final key takeaway here, I think, is to engage local government and engage the community. And so often local governments or, various government levels are required to help support these projects. And so building that consensus is really key. And that's something that we, and particularly MHCH, in their work as an advocacy organization, have been so successful in doing. So in order to help deliver a project that fulfills these, kind of best practices, we have a 6-step process that we take congregations through. And so here you see the 6 steps. The first one, identifying informed congregations, is really about understanding, helping you understand what affordable housing is, how it gets done on congregational land, and whether your property is one that is suitable for this kind of development, and if so, what type. And so all of these things are done through an educational cohort. And so when I'm done with this, Jill's going to share the information about how to register for our next educational cohort. We do this through a 5-session cohort that's held twice a year. For the congregations that are interested, you need to go through the cohort, and then at the end of the cohort, you submit an intake form, which is basically like an application to us for assistance, right? In going through the rest of the process and helping you put together that partnership and get that project built. Through the cohort, I think, congregations get to know our team a little bit, and our team gets to know the congregations and see whether we have a feasible project that is likely to move forward. If so, we move forward with an agreement for professional services, which basically just means that you hire us to work for you in doing all of these things. The big catch with this hiring is that you don't have to pay us up front. So we will provide all the services in steps 2 through 5 without cost to the congregation. And when and if that project ends up with a real development partner, a real project moving forward, then the developer will be obligated to pay us back for the time that we've spent working for you. And so the process that we go through is basically a feasibility study, looking at all the different factors about what can get built on the property that might generate a couple of different options that you want to think about as a board, as a congregation, that you might need to share with the city or other external actors. And at the end of step 3, eventually you have that plan that we talked about, right? That plan that everybody says, yeah, this is the kind of project that we want. We know, for example, you know, let's say I'm on a property that has been burnt. It's a religious congregation property that has been burnt, but I know that I can build an affordable housing development, and I know that I can build into that affordable housing development an office space and a worship space for my congregation so that my congregation can return. Or I am not in a, you know, I'm not in the burn zone, I'm someplace else, but I have these old buildings, maybe parking lots that are really not used very much, that generate, you know, a lot of upkeep needs. And we know we're going to get rid of those, but we're going to keep our sanctuary. We're going to retrofit, or we're going to renovate certain other parts of our campus to accommodate all of our ministry within a reduced footprint. And we're going to make space for an affordable housing development. Those are some examples of the kinds of discernment that you might go through this process. Once we have that plan set, then it's going out to the market to find a developer. And we typically would do this through a competitive bidding process, a request for proposals. We find that when developers have to bid for your business, you know, then they will offer more, and it really ensures a fair deal, which we then help to negotiate through step 5. Okay, step 6 is an optional step after you're working together with your partner, where you can continue to have some representation from our side. So that's kind of the overview of the process. Of course, with the cohort, step 1 being really the critical part of that right now. And so just finally, some concluding thoughts here for the time that we're in after the fires. You know, Scott's talked about the critical need that we have in the San Gabriel Valley for affordable housing. And after the fires, of course, 5,000 more people or households, I think, right, displaced. It's that need has just become so much more critical, right? Maybe we had 9 chairs maybe we had 8 chairs for the 10 people before. Now we have 7, right? So because we've lost so many housing units. And so there really, I think, is a way in which all of us, no matter where we're located, need to be thinking about what is our response? How can we support? How can we help keep our San Gabriel Valley community intact and provide housing for people? So some congregations and some landowners in general are going to be well suited for what are called tax credit projects. These are large government funded projects that serve people at lower income levels. Tax credit projects really have the most advantageous potential sort of deal structure for congregations, and where you can have a ground lease that has minimal risk to the landowner and still compensates the congregation quite well for the use of the land for affordable housing over the long term. The catch is that you need to have space for a large project, and you also need to, and also the funding sources right now really target safe areas, you know, from a wildfire perspective, safe areas, affluent areas, and transit-oriented areas. So for landowners that are not in that situation, you know, it's looking at smaller and more creatively funded projects. And this is something that our committee we're kind of constantly trying to uncover the best practices in and find the right partnerships to recommend to congregations. And I know, we're still doing that right now. We don't necessarily have a solution right now for, let's say, properties who were burned down in the fire and are smaller. But some of the things that we know are possibilities are potential temporary housing that could later be converted into permanent housing. And I think as a landowner, you also need to think about your risk tolerance for some of these projects, because they won't necessarily have the same kind of structure that the larger tax credit projects could have. It could have greater reward, but greater risk. And then finally, the last kind of thing I think for us to think about is the need for permissive zoning. So, and especially thinking about the burn areas. So we can all understand the desire to minimize new construction in the burn areas, in unsafe areas. And I think that's a really legitimate perspective to think about. But we also need to think about the fact that rebuilding, especially in some of the flatter areas of Altadena, it's going to require monetizing some of the land value, because insurance payouts, FEMA, et cetera, is not going to be enough to cover the cost of construction. And, you should see the recent webinar that MHCH did on this topic, which was super, super informative about it. But in many cases, things like building an ADU, splitting a lot, if you have a larger lot, like for a congregation, for example, doing a mixed use redevelopment with housing and congregational space, that's going to be required in order to bring the funds in that are necessary to rebuild your space. And the threat to that really right now is that the county has asked the state to suspend its state laws, which permit a lot of these things. And so that is something that we all need to be paying attention to. And, I would say it would be good for us to advocate for as well. All right. So thank you. I know I went over my time, but I appreciate your patience and look forward to your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Thank you. That was a great overview and a lot of great work you're doing. There are no questions in the chat. So if somebody has a question, you could raise your hand. It's best if you use the raise your hand function. That way we can actually see it, because otherwise I may not be able to see you if you just raise your hand on the screen. Are there any questions for Phil?
Or Scott.
I have a question.
Or Scott, yeah, either Phil or Scott, yeah. There was, okay, Scott, the other Scott. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Oh, I am unmuting myself.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, you're unmuted.
So, Scott, you were explaining how each city in the county is required, or in the valley, is required to have a plan for housing, low-income housing, that never get developed. Now, I know a lot of the pushback is NIMBYism. Nobody wants to have a interim housing or shelter in their area. And first of all, let me step back and say this. You guys are amazing. You're nationwide. You're doing amazing work. Everything I heard, I was really impressed with. So, but one of my thoughts was, why doesn't the state create a law that says every city has to create its own shelter relative to the size of its homeless population?
Well,
Similar to Azusa, Baldwin Park, they got 25 tiny homes. It's something. In the San Gabriel Valley, we have nothing. I do street outreach, so I know that if I want to put somebody someplace, I have to take them to the valley, to Long Beach, to Lancaster. But the chances of them finding interim housing here in this valley are slim. So is there a way to develop that ordinance that they have now into a law that makes each city do that and find a spot, and don't let the NIMBYism derail it and build it.
Yeah, well, Scott, great comment, and thanks. Just clarification, we're only regional. We haven't gone national. That's a whole nother thought, but thank you for your comment and your question. Yeah, you're correct in the understanding that every city has to develop a housing element that they submit to the state, and the state kind of rubber stamps that. But you're right, there's no real teeth in that, and this has mainly been post redevelopment funds being slashed and taken by the state in 2012 approximately, when because a lot of cities were using redevelopment funds for their own administrative reasons and not for building affordable housing. And so there has been some different bills at the state level, and others could probably speak to this more, but it has never gotten to the point to be able to pass, because they really feel like that cities really focus on local control, that they don't want the state telling them what to do. And so it hasn't had the political will to be able to get it to pass. And so, so we've really been emphasizing that we understand local control, but local control doesn't mean that you do nothing. Local control means you build out what you have in your housing element, you build out what you have in your homeless plan. And so if every city, like you said, did a little bit, homelessness, especially in the San Gabriel Valley, would be done away with. Because you're right, Union Station has a interim housing. Reggie Clark is on here from VOA, from Pomona. Yep. They have housing, and Baldwin
Both great
Park.
places. I'm a graduate of Union Station Adult Center, so.
Oh, okay, great. Well, you're right. There's very limited. There's some tiny homes. Paul Cho is on here as well with Life Arc, which works at the Azusa property. And so there's only about 4 or 5 cities: El Monte, Baldwin Park, Azusa, Claremont has some affordable housing, but you're right, there's not a lot of interim housing. So we'll keep advocating, but I think at the local level, if you can get cities to implement their housing element and their homeless plan, that's what really needs to happen. But others can obviously jump in.
Please, anybody.
I think Lisa, you had your hand up.
Can I say something about this?
Oh.
Just 2 things I wanted to say. First of all, local control often means control by homeowners who tend to be wealthier. In our city, for example, Pasadena, we wanted to have rent control passed, and 60% of the residents are renters. Many are low income, but the city council was almost, I think, unanimous in opposing rent control. There was only 1 or 2 who supported it. So local control doesn't necessarily mean that the majority of residents are in control. It means that those who elect the city council members have more influence. The other thing is that we had an affordable housing bus tour and invited elected officials from the San Gabriel Valley to see what Pasadena had done around affordable housing. And I think when our elected officials see how beautiful affordable housing is and hear stories of people whose lives have been transformed by affordable housing, they can become more open to considering it for their cities.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Lisa Fishback put a question in the chat, so that may have been what she was wanting to ask. But it says, "Are you concerned that federal funding?" I think this goes to Phil. "Are you concerned that federal funding and credits will be cut off through the slashing of the current administration?" So that is something that's been coming up. Like, what's going on with tax credit funding? Is that going to continue to be a viable source?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit, but I think my colleagues may know more more than me on this. Yeah, I think we've already started to see vouchers and some kinds of direct funding for affordable housing and tenant supports as well being cut in the new administration. As it relates to tax credits, however, that is a different situation. So a tax credit is not a check from the federal government. The tax credit is, it's in the tax code that people or corporations, very large corporations which have tax liability can instead purchase tax credits for that fund low-income housing development to reduce their tax bill. So because it is ultimately reducing the tax bill of corporations, tax credit affordable housing was, it was instituted during the Reagan administration, and it has been supported by Republicans from that time up until the present day. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be supported going forward, but that's sort of what I know about it in its history.
Okay. And Phil, you said there might be some other people that know more. Who are you think that are here tonight? Who are you thinking of?
Anyone, Bert, Anthony,
Okay.
Bill.
I'd heard that there was going to be problems with them, but I don't understand the technicality around it. So I was just wondering if there's somebody else that was here. But let me, I do want to get to the question because people are putting questions in the chat. And then I know Matt has his hand up as well. So, but let me read, you answered Noel's question about needing parking, so people can read that in the chat. But let me see here. Dan, okay, that's a different thing. Amy says, which comes first, advocacy and awareness raising in your city, rehousing justice, or the work on a property specific project? That's a good question.
Maybe Jill, take that one.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Which comes first, advocacy and awareness raising in your city, regarding housing justice, or the work on a property specific project?
Yeah, that's an interesting question in terms of the priority. Our recommendation in working with congregations is that you don't go public until you have secured an affordable housing developer. And because you don't want to invite anything that will kill that project. So you just stay quiet. No need to go public. We were able to get a state law passed, SB 4, and that bypasses local city governments when it comes to the approvals, both at the city council and the planning commission levels, although it does need to go through design review. And so, but that wouldn't be until after you've secured an affordable housing developer. So I think that in that case, it's probably wise to be. I love what the Bible says about wise as serpents and gentle as doves. And so you just have to be very wise in how you go about finessing your timing. I think Jesus was a great example of timing, and but in other cases, you may want to do advocacy initially. We mentioned a couple projects that we were able to get approved, and so advocacy from the get-go. We were there from the very beginning when they presented. In fact, this Thursday we're going to be at the Kaiser site where they're looking at a number of proposals. So once we've heard what's being proposed by the city and by the the various developers that are responding to that RFP request for proposals, then we need to get busy, learn which ones we can support and begin to support that. And so it really just depends. Especially if it's church property, no, stay quiet. And if otherwise, it might be good to.
I would say, yeah, just to add on to that, I would say that a lot of it is going to depend on whether you have a feasible project or not. So if you totally agree, yeah, we generally recommend doing the work on your internal project, and then once you have a developer, then you go to advocate for it. But if you don't have a feasible project, if your zoning is, prohibits you from building, and there's no state law options like SB 4 that you can use to get around that, then you're probably going to need to do advocacy first to even get developers interested in it.
And just to add one thing, I think from a perspective, I've been in a lot of city council meetings that if you go public too soon, like Jill's describing, it becomes just a mess of NIMBY individuals. I won't give stories, but so I do think you line up supporters, you line up the political individuals that you need to have their support before you'd ever go public. So I agree completely with what there's being said.
Right. And there also may be, I don't know if somebody wants to speak to this, Jill or Phil or Scott, but a community outreach piece, not just advocacy at the city council, but reaching out to neighbors to get them on your side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some other hands up there. I'll let them.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and let Matt, you want to unmute and speak?
Yeah,
Your
thank
question?
you so much. And thank you to the presenters for sharing your information and what's going on. Like I mentioned, if you all don't know, I'm organizer with the Los Angeles Community Land Trust Coalition. And while our work is mostly in preservation of existing affordable housing, we have done some limited new construction. So there is like, familiarity with like light tech and stuff like that. Right now, my question is regarding like, the burn area and rebuilding, and some folks that I've been in contact with who have expressed interest in building affordable housing in addition to rebuilding their houses of worship. Like, there while there may not be a lot, like we're unsure about the federal funding, there is like, Measure A funding that may be coming online soon. There's also other sources of local funding that housing advocates in the state are fighting for, both at the state and regional level. And so like my question is just a little bit about like how flexible can we or creative can we be in thinking about like the type of housing projects that can go online and like the partnerships that we can do, because like from my understanding, light tech funding doesn't really afford home ownership opportunities. It's mostly just for rentals only. And considering that a lot of the burn area is consisted of people who are homeowners, I feel like it would be a tough sell if we're going to be replacing owner occupied units with rental units. So I'm wondering like if there's been like any experience in like those maybe more creative type of projects through this endeavor, and if folks here have been considering alternative forms of like ownership or construction.
Yeah, and I'll say that absolutely we're considering all of these different options. I'm sitting here actually right now, this building you've seen go dark behind me as the sun's gone down is actually an affordable homeownership building where I live. So yeah, that's absolutely something that's interesting to us. I think the complications come with figuring out for a congregational project, what does their land interest want to be in that? So when a congregation wants to retain ownership of the land long-term through a ground lease, then selling the unit, becomes not impossible, right? But more difficult. So that's probably something where you could advise us quite a bit on, Matthew, since you have a lot of experience in selling units apart from the land. So I'd love to dialogue with you more.
Yeah, let's be in touch, because I think like the way that you had mentioned is not very different from how community land trust operates with the ground.
Yeah.
But like like the whole piece of a community land trust is about centering resident ownership and governance, and like allowing as much like agency from the people who live there as possible. And I know like that may be a little bit new in like traditional affordable housing circles, but I think it's something important to think about, like especially like we're talking now about like mostly homeowners who've been affected, and like how we can sort of restore that home ownership piece, and also maybe like use this as an opportunity to bring people who've been displaced even before due to gentrification back home to Altadena. So like I'd love to continue the conversation offline. Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that briefly. I appreciate the question, Matthew, very much. One of the things that we are really fortunate to have here in Pasadena is affordable homeownership. It's very unusual. Most cities cannot pull that off. And it's because we have a funding source. And so there's very little opportunity for funding affordable homeownership anywhere in the country, not just here in California. And so that's part of the reason it's very hard to do this on church campuses. It's not impossible. It's very possible that Heritage Housing Partners or Habitat that do homeownership could partner with a church, but most likely they will not get any kind of return for the long-term use of their land. And so if they're willing to do that, instead of a rental and no longer get any kind of a return, there might be some small return, but typically it's not anything close to what you might get if it's a tax credit project. So it depends on the priority of the church, and what their needs are. So
One
I
thing
am
that
aware
Matthew,
actually, oh, sorry, I'm aware of a small project in an SGV city. I'm not sure if I can disclose it. I think I can. I better not. In a city in the central SGV, a congregation that sold property to for affordable homeownership development. And what they received in return was like a lease back of a small structure on the property to use for some ministry purposes. So that's an example.
two things real quick. One, Matt brought up Measure A, sorry. It replaced Measure H in the county. And that is a half-cent sales tax that's going to bring in, projected to bring in $1 billion a year for affordable housing and services to unhoused people as well. But so that could be a game changer, and that could, I don't know. I don't know if that could replace some LIHTC stuff if LIHTC is no longer usable or it has restrictions that we don't want, but that could be a possibility. The other thing, Grace Durness put a comment in the chat about community land trusts that some people have already read, I see. So, but I want to get to Rosalind. She has her hand up. Rosalind, do you want to ask your question?
Well, kind of to make a comment based on an earlier comment regarding each city taking on their homeless, situation and trying to find housing for it. And it really just appears money is really not the problem, because there's an article today that just came out that I have on my list to read from the California Insider podcast, but they poured billions into homelessness, and they're finding that an audit of it shows deep financial mismanagement, lack of oversight. And I've gone to these meetings for years, any homeless meeting there was, and I would look at all these presentations and all this money they would spend on these beautiful color thick booklets that show what they're building and stuff. And I'm thinking, they still haven't built anything, but they're showing you all this wonderful stuff that'll solve the homeless problem. But the unfortunate thing is the more money they throw at it, the bigger homelessness has grown. There's no incentive. Many of these nonprofits get, 6-figure incomes, 7-figure incomes, $1 million and stuff. The CEOs and high-ranking folks in those nonprofits, there is no incentive to solve the problem, because then it's going to cut off their, milking cow, or whatever the term is. It'll be cut off. And that's what's so unfortunate about it. But what I appreciate about you guys is you guys have, in my opinion, the right spirit and sincerity about helping to address the issue and walking the walk, and talking the talk. And for that, I'm grateful to be a part of this.
Can I
And
respond to that for a minute?
me as well.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, so Rosalind, I appreciate your concern. Thank you. And I just do want to respond that over 100,000 people have been housed. There are so many people moving into these are homeless folks that have been housed in LA County. And so it just doesn't feel like anything is happening because there's just as many people falling into homelessness. And so as far as the funding, that's often for funding services and homeless services, and it's not necessarily for actually building the housing. And so it's very expensive to build housing. And that's where we really need a whole lot more money. We are actually running out of money for that. But I do think that there are some things they're looking at in terms of management around homeless services money. But most of the people I know that are working in homeless services are not getting paid near what they deserve. So that's just my thoughts, and I've been just recently in meetings with folks getting this pretty recent information. So with the county and the city. I don't know what you were going to add to that, Bill.
Well, I just going to jump in. It is completely agree is that, the stat when we had Measure A is that 42 people a day that are being placed into housing, 100,000 in the last 5 years, like Jill said, and 41 people a day are falling into homelessness at the same time. So at the macro level, there is more need that continues. And for the cities that claim that they don't have any money for it, I think the interesting thing is money goes to, and you hear some cities that say, I need my fair share. We pay into Measure H, we pay into Measure A. The difficulty is that cities don't get paid until they do something. So there is funding there, but the funding tends to go to cities that want to do something. And so a lot of cities don't want to do anything. And so nothing gets done. Again, they're not forced to be able to spend the money. And so, and Scott put on here also just about the high cost of apartments, and a lot of that has to do with, and Phil could answer this better than I, but there's a lot of fixed cost in what it takes to build, whether it's market rate or affordable housing or not. It just costs a lot of money. And so you're right, per unit, it is a lot of money, and it makes it difficult to build. So.
Yeah, those figures are actually a little low. I think I've heard like 800,000. So, yeah, Arlene, you want to ask your question?
Good evening, everybody. I'm here in the East Bay, Northern California. So it's interesting listening to conversation about Southern California. I participate in the continuum of care here in Alameda County. And one of the things that I'm really, I haven't really heard too much conversation about. I constantly hear about trying to build our way out of homelessness. And I'm wondering about any legislation anyone is working on in the state to slow the extraction of housing to slow down gentrification. And number one, not only with the single family homes, I think I heard about a piece of legislation with that, but not about multiple units. That's the first thing. The second thing is we talk about preservation, but the communities have changed because of gentrification. And so I'm wondering about, we're passing this legislation to build on faith-based, with build affordable housing, homelessness, etc. But what about any legislation to kind of stop the extraction that is going on and causing many of these issues, raising the rents, the algorithms within real estate, like, Real Page is just like one of many, but any kind of laser focus and intentionality to deal with the other side of the issue, not just on the building of affordable housing? I'm just curious.
I'll just throw out one name. I know an entity that's doing a lot of research in that area, the North area, is one of our speakers at a summit we had 6 months ago is Muhammad Al-Madin out of the Turner Center, which is out of UC Berkeley, is doing a lot of different research. He's just relocating to an organization called YIMBY, California, but Turner Center I know is doing some things, but that's all I have. But great comments, Arlene. You're right on target.
I actually attend Bake Pencil, yeah, at the Turner Center as well. So community land trust, all of these other things, but it's not stopping the slide.
Yeah. One thing, I don't know if anybody else wants to address the question, but and this sometimes it's controversial, but this is why we backed rent control. And I know some people, think that restrains the market too much or something, but it's because of displacement. I mean, we saw a lot of displacement here in Pasadena back in 1980. 20% of Pasadena, slightly over 20% of Pasadena was African American. Today, less than 8%. We've seen a lot of displacement. Altadena, which burned, was at one point, I think, 43% African American, and it had reduced down to 18%. So a lot of gentrification, displacement, and that's why, MHCH, we not only supported rent control and tenant protections, we got involved and did a lot of work to get it on the ballot and to get it passed. So that's one of the things that's not building, it's keeping people from being displaced.
And I appreciate that because of the reduction of attendees in the congregation at churches because of displacement. And so,
Exactly.
there's been a huge shift in the demographics. So I appreciate you even saying that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've tried to work a lot through the Black churches here in Pasadena because they have been hit the hardest. Churches are having a hard time in general, with a few exceptions, but the Black churches we've seen have been hit the hardest, and so we've tried to really come alongside, and they're part of our larger group. And the community, the Clergy Community Coalition here in Pasadena was started by Black pastors, and their number one issue when they started was affordable housing justice.
Yeah.
And it's now grown into an organization with quite a bit of a convening power, where every month, 40 to 50 church leaders gather.
What's the name of this again?
Clergy Community Coalition.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so it's 8:23. If there are, I hope I didn't miss any questions in the chat. There was some back and forth and some statements made that I think are worth reading. But Jill, why don't you tell people about the cohort? Phil mentioned it, but can you give the specifics?
Sure. So I hope you all can see this. This is the flyer for the cohort. There's usually anywhere from 5 to 15 congregations of all stripes. It's a great experience because you may be sitting next to a Black Baptist church and be a Episcopal church or a Presbyterian or United Methodist. And so it's just been a joy to see the mix of churches that participate, that are interested in this. We typically haven't charged at all in the past, but we do make zoning maps on the first day for each congregation, and those are quite expensive. And so, we are charging a fee just to make sure you really are interested in coming. And so we'll invest in making that zoning map for your church. And then you can scan that QR code, or you can use this. I believe there's a link here as well. Click here, yes, to register. So I'll make sure that this is sent to all those that are registered. So if you are interested, if you're a church or a congregation of any kind, a mosque, a synagogue, that you can participate for these sessions. Yeah, so just briefly, we meet at the beginning and the end in person. So that means if you're far from Pasadena, you need to travel that day from 9 to 1. We meet in person at an affordable housing complex. You get to get inside affordable housing, and it's just gorgeous. So you really you can imagine what a development might be like on your own congregational campus. And then we meet Zoom 3 times, and at the end we meet again in the Heritage Square South, which is, or actually Heritage Square North, which is right by Heritage Square South. These are developments that our organization helped to get approved. So unless you have any questions about that, but we'd love to have you participate, or if you know of congregations, be sure to invite them. It's a great opportunity for you to get to know a lot about zoning discrimination, about different types of affordable housing, either for seniors or for transitional age youth or families, or permanent supportive, which is for those that are chronically homeless. So there's different pots of money for all those different types of housing. So your church, as Phil mentioned earlier, needs to get clear. Who do you want to serve, and how can you best do that in being a good steward of the land that God has given you to? And so we want to work with you. We want to work with you to help you imagine and find out what's feasible, and doesn't obligate you to come. It's just exploratory, and it gives you an opportunity to really learn a lot. So so thank you for staying to this portion of our webinar tonight. And I don't know, did you want to close out in saying something, Bert?
Hey,
No,
can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Because my hand thing doesn't work.
Okay.
I texted a couple of people. A long interest in these issues. As an architect, I have spent a lot of time and introduced to the ideas of how you make buildings more energy efficient by working with nature, i.e. solar-oriented design, which I think could have a really important part of affordable housing, because if done correctly, buildings could be 50 to 80% more efficient than normal buildings without increasing construction costs. And there's in addition to just saving operational costs by providing thermal comfort, heating and cooling with very little energy input, there's also resiliency advantages. So if there's a power outage, your building will stay cool without any energy input. So you don't have to have people move out to go to a cooling center, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, if you're interested, I'm happy to share that information and other research on some really great examples of buildings and developments in California that are greener than most green buildings that don't cost more to build. So there are really some great examples that I specialize in digging them up and figuring out how to make them work. So happy to share that information.
That's great.
Carl, where are you again?
I'm in Pomona.
Oh, I'm in Pomona. Okay.
A project that I have been taking a really deep dive into, and I'll put this in the chat. It's now 50 years old. It's in Davis, California. And the designers were very good at working with as the regenerative principles of how the sun and water move across the site. And they've created a really integrated ecology. This is not for everybody because of the densities required, but there's lessons to be learned. But people live there. It's a 60-acre site, 220 homes, some affordable components to it. but they have created a microclimate that's 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the rest of Davis, and people live there without air conditioning through the summer. And that is really doable.
Exciting.
If it's doable in Davis, it's doable in Pasadena. So anyways, that's my one of my missions in life is we can do much better cost effectively. So
Yeah, I'd love to meet with you sometime and talk more about that. That's because we definitely need to build more environmentally. Obviously, the fires were a result of climate change. I know people are very cautious in saying that, but clearly this has not happened before.
Bert, where are you located?
I'm in Pasadena.
Okay, that's easy. Yeah, I guess
I think we need to close down,
Yeah.
but maybe
Oh.
we can talk after the meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, those who want to stick around can stick around and we'll talk. So Carl, if you want to stick around for a few minutes, but we just do want to just thank everybody for coming, and because 8:30 was our ending time. So those who want to log off, feel free. I mean, some people have already gone, but feel free. Thank you so much for coming, and hopefully, we send out a newsletter every week. If you want to be on our mailing list, let us know about that. And we will let you know when we have another housing justice forum, maybe on the environment, maybe with environment. We've done that before.
Right.
So
thank you all.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you to our presenters, Scott Chamberlain and Phil Burns. Thanks so much. Y'all, it was great. Excellent presentations. Thank you so much.
This was